Question. Dear Kim, what does it mean that consciousness is the underlying reality? What does it mean that consciousness can be said to be that one underlying reality? Well, let's start with ourselves. Why are you able to formulate this question? Because you're conscious. Everything that happens in our lives happens because we are conscious beings. Everything that happens in our lives happens in our consciousness. I've said this before. You're walking down the street, somebody walks up to you and slaps you on one cheek. Your reaction to that, yes, you didn't cause this person to slap you, but your reaction to that situation takes place in your consciousness. You might fight back, hit the person back, whereby you create a karmic and an energetic spiral with that person. But that spiral is created in your consciousness. Or you might do what Jesus said, turn the other cheek, which means you are not creating a spiral with that person. So if you respond in kind, you are tying yourself to that person, but that tie is in your consciousness. If you turn the other cheek, you are not tying yourself, you are free from that person, but that also happens in your consciousness. So everything that happens in your life, it isn't the outer things that affect you, it's your reaction to it, and your reaction takes place in your consciousness. And it depends on, as I've said, you have the 4 levels of the mind, the identity, mental, emotional, and purely physical. And in these 3 higher levels of the mind, we have all these subconscious selves. And the subconscious selves are what causes us to react. So when you allow your reaction to the world to be colored by a subconscious self, you are reinforcing the self. This means you are tying yourself to that. When you turn the other cheek, when you are neutral, you free yourself. Eventually your subconscious self will die, and you will actually attract to yourself other circumstances. But it's all happening in your consciousness. So why is that? Why is it that everything that happens in our consciousness? Because the purpose of the world of form, as I've explained in several videos, including how the world was created, the purpose of the world of form is our growth in consciousness. The entire world is created as an environment to facilitate our growth in consciousness, our growth in self-awareness. And it all happens in our own minds individually. So now we can say, what is the end goal of this process? Let's say we log into this, we're going to raise our consciousness. Well, first of all, as I explained in how the world was created, we live in an unascended sphere. Nothing here is permanent. But we have the possibility to raise our consciousness, raise our self-awareness to such a point that we can transcend this unascended sphere. We can ascend to the spiritual realm, become permanent beings, which is what I call ascended masters. And when you raise your consciousness to a certain level, you will start connecting to your higher self, which is in the spiritual realm, and to the ascended masters. And you will realize that there is a hierarchy of these ascended beings that reaches higher and higher. And if you follow that hierarchy to the end point, there is the being who started our world of form, which is what I call the Creator. And the Creator has a consciousness that's much, much higher than ours. But when you look at this hierarchy of ascended masters go towards higher and higher levels of consciousness, you realize that we are all in the process of raising our consciousness up through all these levels until we reach the Creator consciousness. And once you get a certain feel for the Creator, the existence of the Creator, you are realizing that the Creator is a conscious, self-aware being. Now, as explained in How the World Was Created, there was a point where our Creator decided to create our world of form. And it created everything out of its own consciousness. Because the Creator, we are so used to thinking in terms of, oh, it's a being, I'm a human being, there's spiritual beings, there's God. But a being is a conscious being. It has consciousness. So there was a point where there was no form in our world. Nothing that we could call matter. There was only the Creator's being. And as I said, the Creator is consciousness. And so the Creator created everything out of its own consciousness. It literally manifested out of its own consciousness what we call matter, and which we, of course, from our vantage point, see as different from consciousness. But from the Creator's vantage point and from that of Ascended Masters, there's no difference between matter and consciousness. The Creator clearly sees that all matter is created out of its own consciousness. It's only because we are at such a low state of consciousness in separation that we can even ask, what does it mean that consciousness is the underlying reality? Because when you are in a higher state, you don't have to ask the question, you are just experiencing it, that it's all consciousness. There is nothing but consciousness. It's just that in the density of our material world, it seems as if this glass of water is separate from my consciousness. And it's true, the glass of water is separate from my consciousness, but it's still all created out of the consciousness of the Creator. If you could see beyond the glass, you would see the consciousness of the Creator. There is nothing else. There is nothing else. So, the question is very understandable, but it's born out of the perception we have here in this dense material realm. And the whole purpose of our lives is to free ourselves from that perception, raise our awareness, and then we experience that everything is consciousness. So, what does it mean that consciousness is that one underlying reality? Well, because ultimately, you can say anything that has form does not have an independent existence. It exists only as an extension of consciousness, as a product of consciousness. See, this is the illusion that we are in this world because of the density of the energies. We think they're separate things. We think that this grass has some independent existence. You have the old question, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one here to hear it, does it make a sound? So, if I close my eyes, is the glass still there? Well, yes. So therefore you will say, this glass exists independently of my mind. And that's correct. It exists independently of my consciousness. But it doesn't exist independently of the Creator's consciousness because nothing does. There is nothing that has a separate existence. Everything is created out of and is made out of the Creator's consciousness. That means, in a sense, that if the Creator decided, oh, I've had enough of this world of form, snuff it out. The Creator could do this. There is nothing here that must exist or that has an existence independently of the Creator. Now, I'm not saying the Creator would do this, But I'm just saying, we may think as, you see people on earth, they deny that there's a God. There is no God. And they are saying, I've been denying God my whole life, and I still exist, and the world still exists. So that proves that God isn't necessary for the existence of the world. The world just exists. And that's an illusion that can only be upheld at a certain level of consciousness. Because when you raise your consciousness to a higher level, you experience, not a matter of believing, there's no argument here. You experience everything is out of the Creator's consciousness. Because there is only consciousness. Now, even science, some scientists are beginning to realize this. I've talked about it before. Italian scientist Federico Fascin has written a book called Irreducible, where he talks about this. There are other scientists, Donald Hoffman is one, that talks about consciousness being the underlying reality. So it's really an awareness that is growing. And I think in the next 10, 20 years, it's going to become much more prominent, much more mainstream.